Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. Just going to give it another minute to let people in. We'll be with you shortly and we'll start our first webinar of Series 2. Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome everyone. I'm Elizabeth, as you know. You'll see that we have a new face with us today, Tim. So I'd like to welcome Tim. I'll give a little bit more of an introduction to Tim in just a moment. We want to start with the acknowledgement to country. We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today. And I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. As I said, I've got Tim with me today and I'm really excited to welcome Tim to his first webinar. Tim is the Senior Front-End Developer here at Logiqc. He's got a wealth of experience in web development, and Tim plays a really key role in enhancing the usability and accessibility and performance of the Logiqc platform. He works really closely with all of our teams and ensures that every improvement aligns with real-world needs of users. And Tim's real focus for this webinar, or for his first couple of months at Logiqc, has been about the accessibility and the uplift of the system. And that's why Tim joins me today. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks. Good to be here. Good to meet you all.
Great. Just before we start, your success is our success too. This is our second series of the webinar. We understand that your success hinges on staff engaging with the platform and that the system is really usable for you. And we really see ourselves as being a partner to enable your business to meet those demands. And in this second series of the Your Success, Our Success campaign, we're really going to focus on new features and improvements that will enhance your experience with Logiqc. Some of the things that Tim's going to focus on today is he's going to tell us what are some of the changes that we've made with the new interface, what some of our key focus areas are, how we all made that happen, how we tested it to make sure that it works for everyone. Did that impact any performance issues in the platform as everyone knows it? And what is Logiqc's commitment for the future for accessibility? So with all of that, I'll hand it over to Tim, and Tim will take us through the changes in the platform.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me just pull this up. Going to share my screen. All right. You should be looking at the fantastic new Logiqc dashboard UI. So there are a lot of familiar elements here. However, the first thing that many of you would have seen immediately when we've rolled out the updates is the new and cleaner kind of polish to everything. That's probably the best way I can summarize a lot of what we've done from our UI updates point of view and making sure we're emphasizing accessibility. So immediately what you can see is we've tidied up this sidebar here, introduced some independent scrolling action just to make it more usable, improved the legibility of text from a focus state point of view, and added some visual anchors here as well with some icons. We've also improved the top level navigation. So again, just emphasizing the contrast of interactive elements, introducing things like tappability. So right now, as you're seeing this focus go through the platform, I'm currently just using my keyboard. So that's with tab and shift tab, if you wanted to use that yourself, for example. A lot of good improvements there across the board. So one of the things I do want to focus on is this new create button. Now, one of the things we realize is that you do have access to this button that we've kept for now down the lower right, which is the FAB, or the floating action button. So with this button, any user can create, at least on the top level, any entity or register item that they have access to. However, once you start drilling down into the actual individual areas, that becomes more focused on just your top level registers. With the create button, what we decided to do was make it easier for any user to create any entity that they have access to from anywhere in the platform. And this, in its own way, supersedes the FAB. Now, we have kept the FAB there for you because we realize a lot of people are using this every single day. So we've kept that there for the meantime to help you ease the transition into using the create button. But we do feel that everything in the top right is kind of your action area. It's where a lot of your things will be happening for how to create new entities, how to control things, and how to filter items there. Why don't we actually go ahead and use this? So one thing I'm going to create, which is something that hopefully not very many people create too often, is an incident. And we'll dive into the actual forms. Again, emphasizing that cleanliness, the uplift of the UI, the alignment of the fields, introducing that tabability, which I highlighted with the navigation here. So being able to tab through the form with clear focus states and highlights. The typography has been uplifted, the contrast has been improved, and we've made the action states far more consistent across a lot of these entities as well. Let me show you the table as well, because there's quite a few improvements here. So let me dive back into incidents, and I'll leave this. So again, you're seeing a huge uplift of the UI, bringing things into alignment, making them easier to navigate. We have all of your same functions here, but we focused on a hierarchy improvement. Previously, we had the tabs above in the table, and we had the search above that, where the add incident button used to be. And then aside that, we would have our options to edit the actual columns and all of our filtering options here as well. So everything is still in place, but again, just to show you the granularity of what we were considering when we were making these actual changes. Now, hopefully this doesn't scare too many of you, but I do want to emphasize some of the work that goes on behind the scenes when we're making these changes. So you'll see here on the right, a very scary kind of a panel, but this is a really good contrast between what we actually see as humans, which is on the left. We see user interface. We need to make that as clean and consistent to use and readable as possible, as per guidelines, which I'll go through in a little bit. But when it comes to the browser, when it comes to these robots, they just see all of this code. So whenever we're rolling out features, we need to consider, how do we make it as usable as possible for humans to have a look at and navigate with ease and clarity, but also how do we make sure that machines can access it and read it as clearly and as easily as possible and without error? Because people seem to be much nicer when they run into problems. Machines just tend to not work. So hopefully that gives you a bit of context for the amount of things we were considering in order to roll out a lot of these improvements.
Tim, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it, please.
Sorry to interrupt. I think you're going to touch on what I wanted to ask you now, but I wanted to just ask you why. Why was it really important for us to do this uplift and to make it more usable and more accessible?
Yeah, so I think I've mentioned this in other cons, which if you haven't read, check out the Logic blog. It's brilliant. But one of the things I mentioned there is what drew me to Logic in the first place was this commitment to making sure that what's being rolled out is kind of people focused, that everyday people are the people using this platform. They're the people making all of this happen. And sure, it is in quality compliance, and there's a lot of tedium to that, but it's for very good reasons. And that comes back to the people. Part of that is making the platform as accessible as possible, which I really see some strong alignments with from where I've come from a website and platform development point of view. And to that, we referred to what's known as the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So this is the international standard for how to make websites, whether that's a content website, such as a such as the Logic blog, or if it's a highly sophisticated SaaS platform like the Logic platform, these are the guidelines for how to make it as accessible as possible, and they're incredibly comprehensive. So one of the things I dived in when joining Logic was making sure that we were as compliant as possible and going against each of these individual criteria to see where the Logic platform stood. So accessibility is hard to really get a perfect record, and it's even harder still for something like the Logic platform. Often SaaS companies, they will make things fairly usable, and they'll have someone from a UI design and UX point of view go through the platform, but they may not necessarily give accessibility the attention that it deserves, and instead lean more for branding and aesthetics. So being able to go through this criteria here gave us a very clear breakdown of where the Logic platform had already succeeded with the UI uplift, but also where it may have needed a little bit of help. And that acted as a North Star for us in our improvements. And a lot of everything that I've talked about here, from considering the user experience to just optimizing and creating this create button, adding the visual anchors, improving readability, even things like the border color for these fields have to follow specific criteria here for contrast ratios. And that's something we've looked at, tracked against, and worked to improve. But it's an ongoing effort.
Tim, I've got another question, if that's okay. I was just wanting to know, now that we've done this based on those guidelines, and like you said, that's a North Star for us, so we'll continue to be working towards that. How did we go about testing this to make sure that across our customer base, everyone's going to have a really good experience?
Yeah, great question. So I was leading the charge from the development point of view for a lot of these front end and UI updates. However, when it came to testing, that was a team effort, which was needed for a few different reasons. Firstly, it's great to get different people using these features and testing them and providing impact on it. So it doubles and triples the amount of experience, especially from a technical point of view, for how we can actually deliver these features that we're trying to bring to the users. The second part is that I only have a set number of devices, and while I have testing platforms that let me test on certain different phones, be that Android or iPhone or Windows, it's great to have that in your hands and be able to use it. So we tested features against a whole collection of different devices, such, again, Android, iPhone, but also different browsers on those as well, such as Chrome, Safari, Firefox. We tested on Windows and Mac OS as well to make sure that these updates were working well. Now, there is another factor in this as well, which isn't just the platforms, but it's also the form factors. So when you're using the platform on your phone, you have very limited screen real estate, and often the context is different. You're not sitting at a desk, you're out and about, and you might be in the field. So trying to make sure that we're catering to all of these different contexts and display windows was very important to us, and that's how we went about testing them on actual different devices and platforms.
Right, thanks for that. I've got another question for you, and that's about usually when people make massive big changes to platforms and websites and things, it often impacts how that website or platform performs. How did we make sure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah, the convenient thing about working in a front end space is often you're not touching the foundational work of the platform, and that's where a lot of these um, uh, performance indicators kind of actually happen. So things like your API service and your backend and the page delivery, that's done by the infrastructure and backend of the platform. So a lot of these UI updates, they only served to improve the performance of the actual user experience, which I think we've fairly well achieved. So it doesn't or hasn't impacted any of the behind the scenes performance. You're still getting the great service that you've come to expect from Logic with the added benefit of improved UX. I will say, however, in alignment to these UI updates, we were doing our usual due diligence and tracking analytics on the platform, and we noticed that there were some improvements to be made on how quickly certain registers were delivering searches, especially with complicated searches where you have an elaborate array of filters to consider, which really niches down your refined data set. So not only do you get the UI updates and no negative impacts to performance, we're actually rolling out improvements to performance alongside these updates.
I'm sure everyone will be happy to hear that. Tim, one more question from me, and then I'll remind everyone, please pop your questions in the Q&A. We are going to have a couple of minutes spare for Tim to answer. So I'll ask one more, and then we'll love to hear from you. So please go ahead and pop those in. Tim, earlier in our conversation this morning, you said that that YCAG guideline is the North Star for us for accessibility moving forward. How are we going to make sure that we continue to uphold that standard and improve to get up to the highest level? I think it's AAA, you said, that we can get. How are we going to commit that?
Yeah, so I'll break down the web content accessibility guideline kind of rating. So there's A, which is congratulations, you've made a usable platform. Then there's AA and then AAA. AAA is incredibly hard to actually achieve. The effort required to achieve AAA versus AA is geometric. It's not linear. So we are being realistic about our expectations for what kind of accessibility rating we can achieve. And again, I just want to emphasize the fact that we're looking at the WCAG guidelines and criteria, I feel puts us a step above so many different SaaS vendors who are looking purely at the broad stroke of what it means to be accessible, and they're using aesthetics and brand principles to guide their user interface design. Yes, we have made a very aesthetic user interface, but we've also gone through these guidelines, and the key difference between this more wishy-washy we're being accessible approach and actually having a clear list of criteria means that these are things we can check against when we're actually rolling out new criteria. So there are quite a few exciting pieces in the roadmap for Logiqc moving ahead, and a lot of that has to do with impacting things like forms and rolling out new features for a report-only license, things like this. I won't say too much more there, but there's some big picture stuff that needs the clear criteria that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines has provided. And the good thing is, with that criteria, we can work against it and work to improve the platform in very specific and in specific ways, in ways that are in alignment with global standards.
Tim, we've got a question from one of our participants today. And I think that links to why we tested it on smaller devices. So the question is there a mobile app in the future?
Maybe I've already said too much, but I will say that yes, there's some talk about a mobile application. This is something I have heard people working on, but you will hear more about that in official communications later.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say to that, I'd second what Tim says, and just say keep an eye up on socials and keep a lookout for all of your newsletters and communications that come from us. Any more questions in the Q&A? Please go ahead. While we wait for someone to type a question potentially, what I would just like to say today is remember that that this session is recorded. This, as well as any other comms about it or the question and answer table, will be included in an email that will go out to you today. It will also be in on the Logiqc Academy, so you can access it from there as well. When you get this recording, share amongst your team. Please let as many people possible know why we did what we did, so they can have a bit of a look at some of the so they can have a look at what the uplift is. Tim, I have another question for you. Can you please show some more examples of the changes in the uplift?
Sure. Do we have any specific requests?
I think just have a bit of a look at what some of the changes in the colors and the changes in the form. Maybe some people kind of missed out on that.
Yeah, definitely. Let me dive back in here, pull up the window and close that scary panel that I had open before. Great. So we're having a look at the dashboard again. So to be fair, a lot of this was very high level, and there's a lot to kind of drill into here. What I'll talk about briefly is some of the updates to typography. In the previous version of the platform, there was a lot of inconsistency when it came to what kind of fonts we use and even what kind of font families we use. So font families are the ones in Word when you're picking like, impact or Arial, things like this. We made that much more consistent across the platform, but not just that, but also your font styling. So what kind of sizes should we use for the actual fonts? And again, checking against the content accessibility guidelines. So there's a lot of criteria that speaks to what written content should actually look like. How large should it be? How bold should it be? How readable is it? What kind of contrast should the colors of the text actually use? These are all things that we were considering going through. Again, there's so much to consider in the platform that it can be a little bit hard to capture all of the details, but we've done, I think, a very comprehensive kind of a job. And again, we have that clear list of criteria to continue working towards as we roll out improvements. Something else I'll emphasize is this this traffic lights here. So this is a great example of our process and how it'll give you an idea of how we're sense checking things. So quite a few other users have a far more comprehensive dashboard when it comes to these stats at the top here. So what we did is bring the icons into alignment here from a color point of view, and we just decided to paint all of this the Logic yellow. We didn't actually keep the extra colors such as the blue, red, and green. And when we were doing user testing, so this was in the form of user interviews, and maybe here today we actually have a few people who joined us for those interviews, but someone actually asked, it's like, oh, where's my traffic lights? And, I remember Brett and I were on this call, like, what do you mean traffic lights? We don't have traffic lights in the dashboard. What are you talking about? And it was then that we found out that the color coding that had been added to these icons, which weren't necessarily truly random, but they had kind of been applied to the old platform or the old UI without the intention of being traffic signals. They were just applied to certain items here and certain stats. That was communicating a status that otherwise wouldn't have been communicated to end users. And this was a bit of a weird use case, because one of the things that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines makes very clear is you can't communicate information using colors. It needs to be communicated with other means, such as text. So this is to cater for people with color blindness, for example. However, we were communicating what these items actually were. So for example, we have the text label there. This is for completed tasks, for example, and the red here is for overdue tasks. So it's still communicating what the stat actually is and excuse me, the emphasis on it. So this is an overdue task, reading that text, even if you were colorblind or visually impaired, you would have the sense that this is your overdue ones. There's an impetus to that. However, we did have our, I guess, color enabled users who were using this as a traffic light system. So there are quite a few other stats which use the green and quite a few others which use the red, and that's to bring home the importance of what that actually means. And that's just to demonstrate not just the use of color in the platform, but also the ecosystem for our testing and how we tried to make sure we were keeping as much value and refining as much value for the end user as possible. Yeah, do we have any more specific QA like questions we can dive into?
Tim, is there a difference between the form when it's active, so we're actively working on it, and when it's like a closed form? Did we make any changes to that perspective? Is there a difference? Can we see where a form has already been completed?
Yep. What I'll do is I'll bring up a closed incident, and then we'll go to one here. So again, going back to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there's some indications here that any interactive element must use a 3:1 contrast ratio. That doesn't necessarily have to be between the background, but it has to be within the edge of that interactive element and then the background of the page or whatever that element is sitting on. In this case, in the case of forms, the way that we've implemented that is with the border around the form field, which is the interactive element, and then the background of the form space. So you can see here the incident detail card is white, and then we have this gray form field here, which you can type into. We have the active state, which is emphasized with the Logic brand yellow, which is more of an action color, and it's in alignment with the brand. So just showing you can have the best of both worlds when it comes to designing for accessibility and aesthetics. But also this is meeting our contrast requirements. And the reason you have these contrast requirements is because it just makes it easier to use. This is the active form, I will say. When it comes to the inactive elements, what we've done is roll out something like this. Now, we do have a little bit of indecisiveness or ambiguity about the direction of this. And that's because we've tried to maintain the same kind of visual layout as the entering form, because this informs users where information actually is on the platform. You're expecting certain inputs in certain areas within the same visual field. A lot of people use the same browser on the same resolution on the same side of the screen. So their eye is hunting for specific pieces of the page when it comes to looking for certain pieces of information. And that's why we've tried to keep this in the same kind of arrangement. However, this is a closed incident, for example. Again, this is all just testing data. You're not seeing any actual personally identifiable information or client information here. This is a sandbox environment. So just to emphasize that and make that clear here. So this is all testing information. But this here is trying to provide the same structure of the form for, again, that anchoring of visual information, while not necessarily providing an interactive experience. So because these aren't interactive fields or elements, we don't necessarily have to keep, nor should we keep, the contrast ratio there. So this is the difference between closed items and closed information, and active items and active information. Long term, though, we are considering reviewing what this actually looks like and presenting the information in a different way. But that's something, like I tried to articulate with the dashboard, we're going through quite a bit of a process to make sure we're delivering the same kind of value to you and keeping things as well presented and consistent as possible.
Great. Thanks, Tim. There's no more questions, so I'll take over the screen if you don't mind.
Yep. Thank you.
So again, we'd just like to thank everyone today for joining our webinar and for taking the time to meet with us, and also for Tim for coming along and telling us more about the technical side and the usability of the platform and accessibility. As always, remember the Q&A will be, everything will be sent out to you, the recording, any of the questions that Tim answered, we'll type all of that up neatly and have that sent out to everyone as well. If you need any support, click on the help inside your platform or connect with support@logic.com.au. For anything else, please reach out to customer success@logic.com.au. And we really look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So keep an eye out on socials. We'll be in touch shortly. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for your time. I'll give you a call.